"That's my car!" I screamed as Karen Winters, our HOA president, watched her husband deliberately send my grandmother's cherished 1967 Mustang rolling down the boat ramp into Willow Creek Lake. The cherry-red convertible splashed into the water, then slowly sank, 50 years of family memories disappearing beneath the surface. Karen smirked, clipboard in hand, like she'd finally won. Section 14, paragraph 7. Vintage vehicles must be stored in garages, she recited coldly. Maybe next time your grandmother will follow the rules. What this power-hungry HOA tyrant didn't realize. 3 days earlier, I'd secretly purchased the entire subdivision. Every street, every house, including her McMansion with its precious rose garden that won Yard of the Month 8 times running. The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours. Karen had told my 82-year-old grandmother that morning, slapping a yellow violation notice on her for simply unloading groceries from her unauthorized vintage vehicle in her own driveway. Grandma's hands trembled as she clutched the citation. "I've had this car for 50 years. Now suddenly it's against the rules." I'd stayed quiet about my property acquisition, planning to surprise Grandma once the paperwork finalized. But watching Karen's husband Robert deliberately roll that beautiful Mustang into the lake changed everything. As police sirens wailed in the distance, I pulled out my phone. "Sam, it's Alex. Expedite those property transfer notifications, every single one." Karen's perfectly highlighted head whipped around. "Property transfer," she repeated, the color draining from her face. The real neighborhood showdown was just beginning. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. I was helping Grandma unload groceries when I heard the familiar click-clack of designer heels on pavement. Karen Winters approached, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, not a single blonde highlight moving despite the breeze. "Mrs. Mitchell," Karen's voice dripped with fake sweetness. "Classic cars must be stored in garages, not driveways." Section 14, paragraph 7. She gestured dismissively at the beautiful Mustang my grandfather had gifted Grandma on their 25th anniversary. "I'm just unloading groceries," Grandma explained. "It'll be in the garage in 5 minutes." "That's not the point," Karen snapped. "Third violation this month, $350 fine, effective immediately." I stepped forward, blood boiling but voice deliberately calm. "The car isn't even parked. We're actively unloading it." Karen's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Alex Mitchell. I'm staying with my grandmother while finishing some business in town." What I didn't mention was the nature of that business. Finalizing the purchase of the entire Oak Ridge Estate subdivision through my investment company. "Well, Alex, unless you're on the property deed, this conversation doesn't concern you." Karen's harassment wasn't new. It had escalated since Grandma spoke against her proposed landscaping regulations at the last community meeting. Karen had been systematically targeting anyone who challenged her authority. Like the Johnsons, fined $500 because their daughter's wheelchair ramp didn't match the approved aesthetic. Or Mr. Ramirez, forced to remove the memorial garden for his late wife, because Karen personally disliked the Virgin Mary statue he included. 6 months of careful, anonymous property acquisitions had finally paid off 3 days ago when I signed the last paperwork. My investment firm now owned the land beneath every home in Oak Ridge Estates, including Karen's prized property with its recently renovated 3-car garage. Later that afternoon, Grandma rested while I made work calls in the backyard. The sound of engines caught my attention. Peering over the fence, I spotted Karen with 2 HOA board members, her husband Robert and her friend Susan, standing beside Grandma's Mustang. The driver's door hung open, and Robert sat behind the wheel. I dropped my phone and raced around the house. By the time I reached the driveway, Robert had backed the car into the street. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted. "That's private property." Karen stepped forward, waving a document. Section 22 permits removal of persistent violations at the owner's expense. This vehicle has been cited 3 times this month. You can't just take someone's car. We're not taking it, Karen smiled coldly. We're relocating it to the community impound lot until proper storage arrangements are made. Your grandmother can retrieve it after paying all outstanding fines, plus the towing fee. Robert revved the engine, clearly enjoying himself. The beautiful car my grandfather had maintained for decades, that my grandmother treasured above almost all possessions, was being stolen in broad daylight under the guise of HOA regulations. Stop this right now, I warned, my voice dangerously quiet. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Susan laughed nervously. Is that a threat? Robert, document his aggressive behavior for the violation report. As Robert began driving away with Grandma's car, I grabbed my keys to follow them. But instead of heading toward any impound lot, Robert drove directly toward Willow Creek Lake at the edge of our subdivision. I followed in my rental car, bewildered and increasingly alarmed. The lake was a scenic spot with a small boat launch and picnic area. Local kids fished there on weekends. Retirees fed ducks from the small wooden dock. Karen and Susan had followed in Karen's luxury SUV, parking near the boat ramp. They got out, gesturing animatedly at Robert. Something wasn't going according to plan. I parked and jumped out just as Robert accelerated down the boat ramp in Grandma's cherished Mustang. What happened next would change everything in our quiet suburban community. I watched in horror as Robert accelerated down the boat ramp, then jumped out at the last second. The Mustang rolled forward, gathering speed, then plunged into the water with a tremendous splash. "No!" I screamed, rushing toward the water's edge. The beautiful cherry-red convertible floated for just a moment before beginning to sink, water pouring through the open windows. 50 years of memories, my grandparents' road trips, my first driving lesson, Grandma's Sunday cruises, all disappearing beneath the murky surface. Karen and Susan stood nearby, their expressions changing from smug satisfaction to shock. This clearly wasn't part of the plan. "Robert, what have you done?" Karen gasped. Robert stood dripping at the edge of the ramp, looking panicked. "The brakes. They didn't. I couldn't stop it." But the smile I'd seen on his face moments before told a different story. As the roof of the Mustang disappeared beneath the water, something inside me snapped. Years of watching my grandmother being bullied by these people, of hearing stories about their petty tyranny over other residents, it all crystallized into a cold, clear purpose. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, reporting the incident, while Karen, Robert, and Susan argued frantically among themselves. "You idiot," Karen was shouting at her husband. "You were just supposed to take it to your brother's garage. What were you thinking?" "It was an accident," Robert insisted, but his nervous glance toward me suggested otherwise. This wasn't just about a car anymore. This was about power, about people who thought they could take whatever they wanted with no consequences. As police sirens wailed in the distance, I made another call to my lawyer. "Sam, it's Alex. I need you to expedite the property transfer notifications, every single one, and call the insurance company about a 1967 Mustang convertible that was just deliberately driven into Willow Creek Lake." Karen's head whipped around as she overheard my conversation. "Property transfer?" she repeated, color draining from her face. I ended my call and turned to face her, a calm smile spreading across my face despite the anger burning inside. "Oh, didn't you know? As of Monday, I own the entire Oak Ridge Estate subdivision. Every street, every house, including yours." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible. Is it? Funny. That's exactly what my grandmother said when you told her she couldn't park her own car in her own driveway. The police arrived moments later, followed by a tow truck to retrieve the submerged vehicle. As officers took statements and Robert was handcuffed for grand theft auto and destruction of property, I watched Karen's perfect world crumbling around her. "This is a misunderstanding," she pleaded with the officers. "We were enforcing HOA regulations." "By you stealing a car and driving it into a lake?" one officer asked incredulously. By the time I returned to Grandma's house, the news had already spread. My phone was blowing up with texts from neighbors asking if it was true, both about Karen's husband destroying Grandma's car and about my ownership of the subdivision. The next morning, I woke to shouting outside. Peering through the curtains, I spotted Karen marching up and down the sidewalk, megaphone in hand, rallying a small group of supporters. "This is a hostile takeover," she bellowed, her perfectly highlighted hair disheveled for the first time. "He's trying to destroy our community values." My grandmother sat at the kitchen table looking worried. "Alex, what's happening? Mrs. Peterson called and said you bought the entire neighborhood. Is that true?" I kissed her forehead. "It's true, Grandma. I've been working on it for months." "But why?" "Because I was tired of watching Karen and her cronies bully you and everyone else who doesn't fit their perfect suburban image." The doorbell rang, followed by aggressive knocking. I opened it to find Karen, Robert, released on bail, and Susan, along with a man in an expensive suit. "This is Conrad Wilson, our attorney," Karen announced, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. "We demand proof of this alleged property ownership immediately." I raised an eyebrow. "You're trespassing, Karen. Again. Just like when you stole my grandmother's car." I pulled out the property transfer documents, sliding them across the table. "Oak Ridge Property Holdings, my company, now owns all land in the subdivision. Your house leases will continue under existing terms for now." Karen snatched the paper, hands trembling as she read. "We've never leased our homes. We own them." "You own the structures," I corrected. "But check your deed, Karen. You've always leased the land. It's common in planned communities." The attorney studied the document, his expression confirming the truth before Karen was willing to accept it. "What do you want?" Karen finally asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Money? Is this extortion?" My grandmother stood up, surprising us all with her firm voice. "I think what my grandson wants is for you to stop terrorizing people with your ridiculous rules, Karen, and to replace my car that your husband deliberately destroyed." Karen pointed at my grandmother. "Your car violated clear HOA guidelines. Robert was simply enforcing." "Robert committed grand theft auto," I interrupted. "And as for the HOA guidelines, as the property owner, I have final approval on all regulations. Effective immediately, I'm dissolving the current board and calling for new elections." "You can't do that," Susan gasped. "Check your bylaws." "The property owner maintains ultimate authority. It's in Section 1, which I'm guessing none of you bothered to read before using the later sections as weapons." That evening, I called an emergency community meeting at the local park. Nearly every resident showed up, curious about the rumors spreading through the neighborhood. Standing on a picnic table, I explained the situation, the property ownership change, my plans to reform the HOA with democratically elected representatives, and my commitment to fair, reasonable community standards. "No more $500 fines for grass that's half an inch too tall," I promised. "No more arbitrary color restrictions, and absolutely no more harassment of residents who don't fit Karen's narrow vision of suburban perfection." Many looked relieved, even excited. Mrs. Johnson, whose daughter used the wheelchair ramp, was openly crying with relief. Mr. Ramirez, the elderly widower, stood up. "My wife's memorial garden didn't hurt property values. Karen made me tear it up because she personally didn't like the Virgin Mary statue. That's not protecting values. That's imposing her taste on everyone else." As people shared stories of Karen's petty tyranny, a consensus emerged. The community wanted change. I scheduled elections for the following week and established an interim committee representing diverse neighborhood perspectives. But Karen wasn't done fighting. The next morning, for sale signs covered Grandma's lawn. My phone rang nonstop with calls from confused residents. Karen had spent the night telling everyone that property values were about to crash catastrophically, and they should sell immediately. She'd even contacted a local news station claiming a hostile corporate takeover was threatening to displace families. By noon, a TV van was parked at the subdivision entrance. I watched as Karen gave a dramatic interview, tears streaming down her face as she described how a ruthless developer was destroying her beloved community. What she didn't expect was for my grandmother to walk directly into the camera shot. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "I'd like to tell you about how this woman's husband drove my classic car into the lake yesterday as punishment for speaking against her at an HOA meeting." The reporter's eyes widened. "Is that true, Mrs. Winters?" As my grandmother shared her experiences with Karen's HOA regime, other neighbors began to gather. One by one, they stepped forward to tell their stories, all on live television. Karen's carefully crafted narrative was unraveling, but her most desperate move came that evening. As Grandma and I sat down to dinner, the power suddenly went out. Looking outside, we realized it wasn't just our house. The entire street was dark, except for Karen's home, which glowed like a beacon. My friend Jorge, a retired electrician, discovered someone had deliberately cut power to specific houses. Every resident who had spoken against Karen. Robert was caught on a neighbor's security camera near the utility box, wire cutters in hand. He was arrested again, this time for vandalism of public utilities. Karen's perfect facade completely crumbled. With Robert facing multiple criminal charges and my eviction proceeding against them, they listed their house for sale. The notoriety from the news coverage made it impossible to find buyers willing to pay their asking price. They eventually sold at a significant loss and moved out of state. Once a new, democratically elected HOA board was established, I transferred the land to a community land trust, ensuring no single person or corporation could ever again wield property ownership as a weapon against residents. The transformation was remarkable. Neighbors who had barely spoken for years were connecting and helping each other. Mr. Ramirez rebuilt his wife's memorial garden, with neighbors pitching in. The Johnsons' wheelchair ramp was repainted in rainbow colors. As for my grandmother, the neighborhood took up a collection and found a 1968 Mustang convertible, not exactly like her beloved car, but close enough to bring tears to her eyes. On warm summer evenings, you can still see her cruising through the neighborhood in her new Mustang, waving to neighbors who have become true friends. Sometimes she drives down to Willow Creek Lake, remembering her original car and all it represented. But mostly, she celebrates the community that emerged, stronger, kinder, and more united than ever before.